Okay. So just to repeat myself, basically our perspective as Catholics in regards to Catholic social teaching or social doctrine of the church is to always maintain in going back to Jesus Christ. It has to be Christocentric, not ideological perspective. It's not about right or left. Our mind wants to take us in that direction. Our culture wants to take us in that direction. We cannot hijack the gospel. We need to maintain a look at what Jesus did, what Jesus said. So it's always important to go back to it. Because the culture, both the right and the left, have hijacked the gospel. And sometimes they hijack it for their own purposes. There is no worse lie than a half-truth. So the wholeness of Christ needs to be in it. The fullness of Christ needs to be proclaimed when we look at the social teaching of the church. I'm giving you a heads up because the next 7 weeks, 6 weeks, that is during Lent, on the way to the Holy Week, we'll be looking at what is called the tenets of Catholic social teaching, and there are 7 of them. 7 principles, as it were. But these principles are in regards to justice, in regards to bringing a balance to human behavior and also to our engagement in social doctrine. How do we as Catholics, as Christians, represent the gospel before a culture that tends to go far away from Him? See, it needs a culture that wants to go away from Christ. Or the one only take a little bit of Christ, but not the fullness of Christ. And that's what happens when you're followed by ideologies. If we follow by ideological perspective, we're going to take ideological turns. So we cannot allow that to happen. So the one we're seeing today, the first principle is the option for the poor. And now the full word is the preferential option for the poor. The destination of goods and the preferential option for the poor. This is the doctrine of St. John Paul II. It goes back, however, to Leo XIII in a document called Rerum Novarum, if I'm correctly. And Leo XIII stipulated the teachings that would have become the doctrine of the church. And basically, what the preferential option for the poor is that when you have to choose where the goods are going to go, any kind of good, you have to help those who have nothing. That's a Christian principle of justice in regards to mercy. See, justice is to give to others what is their due. Mercy is to give them what they do not deserve. But the gospel that we preach about is not a gospel of justice, it's a gospel of mercy. So always helping the poor becomes the preferential option amongst in any principle. So we'll be talking about how this operates, and then I'm going to give some examples. I'm taking this from the compendium from the Catechism on Catholic social teaching from the Vatican website. If you look in the back, it says Libreria di Tres Vaticana. So this is the Vatican's point of view. So it goes all the way straight to the source. So if someone can read paragraph 1.
The principle of the universal destination of goods requires that the poor, the marginalized, and in all cases those whose living conditions interfere with their proper growth, should be the focus of particular concern.
So that's what it says. It's the preferential option is always for the poor, to help them. The next one, you can continue.
You mean, or the?
Yeah.
To this end, the preferential option for the poor should be reaffirmed in all its force. This is an option or a special form of primacy in the exercise of Christian charity, to which the whole tradition of the Church bears witness. It affects the life of each Christian inasmuch as he or she seeks to imitate the life of Christ. But it applies equally to our social responsibilities and hence to our manner of living, and to the logical decisions to be made concerning the leadership of
Okay. You get 2 goods, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, a few things that I want to peel off that paragraph. First, the word is option. it's crucial that we understand that it's a preferential option, not a preferential force. Because the will needs to be engaged. The document says the exercise of Christian charity. For love to be love, it needs to be free. In other words, it cannot be forced. You cannot force someone to give. If the moment you're forcing someone to give, then you take away free will. You know, there was a nice cartoon that I saw on the internet on occasion of someone, and were two men riding horses on the desert in the middle of the Sahara or something like that. And one of them says to the other, I don't have any food. Do you have any food? I said, I have a sandwich. That's all I have. He says, well, can you give me half your sandwich? And he said, no, I won't. And in the middle of the desert, so there's nothing else to eat. He says, you must give me your sandwich. No, I don't want to. And then he pulls the gun and he tells me to give me your whole sandwich now. You know, of course, at that point he's just giving your whole sandwich. You know, that's the problem when we try to force people to give to the poor. You remove the merit of charity. You know, and then you're doing it by force. Which is something to keep in mind, because sometimes we think that in order to solve the problems of the poor, we need to steal from the rich to give it to the poor, or force the rich to give it to the poor. And that's not a Christian discipline. So it has to be very clear that we're doing it out of charity, to which the whole tradition of the church bears witness and says, inasmuch as he or she seeks to imitate the life of Christ. Again, that's words of freedom, inasmuch as that person. It might mean that the person may be uncharitable and doesn't want to give anything. But it needs to allow for grace and freedom to juggle it. We would like to solve all the world's problems by forcing people to be charitable. You cannot force people to be charitable. You cannot force them. If you're doing that, then it's not love. So we have to look at this principle. In as much as a person seeks to follow the imitation of Christ, then this is the preferential option should be always for the poor. But we cannot force people to help the poor. We cannot be Robin Hood and stealing from the rich to give it to the poor. That's not a Christian principle. It sounds like something nice, but then it starts being Christian. And at that point, then what is our goal? The goal will be to get rid of poverty. Well, Jesus said that poverty is a virtue. Blessed are the poor, Jesus says. Poverty is a virtue. So we want to get rid of poverty, so we're going to get rid of the virtue. So what do we want? We want we want everybody to be rich. Well, the problem when you do that is because wealth is not something that can be generated by just giving away stuff. Wealth is like the ocean. The tide of the ocean. There's only so much water in the ocean. We're not going to talk about global warming and all that stuff. There's only so much water in the ocean. So when the tide is high in Mexico, it's going to be low. Where? Somewhere else. Maybe Europe. Because there's only so much water. When the tide is high somewhere, it's going to low somewhere else. Blame it to the moon, which actually the moon has something to do with it. But when the wealth is the same way. When wealth and money move somewhere, it pulls from somewhere. So we need to understand that wealth is not something that, let's just give it to everybody, a big splash. If you do a big splash of wealth, everybody gets a drop. And that's it. And then there's nothing left. Some economists understand this effect. For us, it's hard to comprehend it because we want everybody to get wealthy. So the best way to get wealthy is let's throw a bomb and then everybody will be wet. Well, there'll be a hole and the planet will be in a problem. But in truth, the economy needs to, what happens, the economy needs to build the economy. In other words, the economic tide needs to build to a nation. You cannot just come and splash food or splash wealth dealing with the drought, the economic drought. But freedom is an important aspect of that. So the logical decision to be made concerning the ownership of use of goods is always to help the poor. So let's say you have a basket of apples, and you're gonna make a pie, and you need 20 apples. I don't know why so many, but apparently there are some places that need 20 apples for that. Apparently they dehydrate. And then you're walking home and you see somebody who has nothing, and you want to give him an apple, but you know an apple might not be enough. So you may have to make your pie smaller. That's the preferential option for the poor. You have an obligation to share with those who have nothing. And maybe invite them along and eat some pie together. But it cannot just be that, okay, I'm going to give you my apples and I have no apples left. So there's an option there. Today, someone?
Today, furthermore, given the worldwide dimension which the social question has assumed, this love of preference for the poor and the decisions which it inspires in us cannot but embrace the immense multitudes of the hungry, the needy, the homeless, those without health care, and above all, those without hope of a better future.
So the problem is if we ignore the poor because they don't produce anything for us, then the problem there's a problem. I remember Pope Benedict in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate, he speaks about the problem of an economy that's driven solely on gain. The survival of the fittest kind of thing. The problem with that is that if you have no charity infused in it, then it can go wild. Because your objective is to be rich and to kill the competition. By doing that, you actually be cheating yourself as well. But we won't talk about capitalism today. But the good thing that the Pope basically says is that if you're just driven the economy based on wealth, and who can make more money, without regulation, then there may be a problem of what's going to happen to those who have nothing. Yeah, you're going to have to get them out of the way. That would be a driving force. And we think, well, these are big issues, and they're in our town. If you want to be aware, go to our house, go to our town hall meeting, and sit there and listen to what's going on. I'll put an example. Right now, the town is growing, as you know, so a lot of land allocation is being done and mapped out for the next 30 to 40 years. We're looking at 25 years, having 70,000 people living in our area. That's what we need a new church. That's my footnote. Most of the decisions, if they're driven by developers, it's easy for them to choose to remove the words in regards to allocation of apartments and mobile homes. Because you don't make a lot of money out of that. You put an apartment where you can put one house, you put 5 apartments, then you're not going to make a big of a profit. So the town may say, the town wants to say, you need to allow apartments in low-income housing. It may require people to live in mobile homes, but developers don't like that. Why? Because that way you shook the market, and people are forced to buy houses. That's a market-driven economy. And if you don't look, you don't watch it, you need to read the small print, because then there will be a problem. There are people who are 30% of our population in Sahuarita are poor. And the preferential option of developers has nothing to do with poverty. So we cannot just allow developers to run freely. That's when we need to be careful, because as Christians we need to say, well, where is the option for the poor? Where are they going to live? So those are the kind of things that we need to look into our principles and we're going to apply them. So you see how the tension between the local, and this is just here in town. Now imagine that nationwide, there's a big problem. sometimes we think, well, it would be better if we just don't see them. That's a sad thing that I heard from people in Tucson in regards to the problem of homelessness. That the best way to get rid of homelessness is to put them in a place where you don't see them. You know, it's a solution that people are seeking. Why? Because I cannot deal with your problems, I cannot deal with your mental issues, I cannot deal with your poverty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to put you out of view. I don't want to see you. That's not a Christian principle. We need to find ways, even if they don't want to work with them. We need to find ways to help them. And we need to find ways to provide for them. So those tensions are necessary as part of the gospel. Speaking of misery, the next one. I'm sorry, question? No, you had a question.
On the other side of the spectrum of
Yeah.
economics.
No, he's I'm asking a question.
On the other side of the spectrum of economics, you know, we talk about the capitalists and not being good.
Extreme capitalism. The church is for capitalism, which is not extreme to that point. We're against extreme socialism.
And the other side of socialism to me, because I mean, if you force everybody to share what you make with everybody, that's socialism.
Or Marxism, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Then again, it's extreme.
Yes, and that's the problem. Is the two socialism, totalitarianism, come with nice ideas. The idea is that to take care of poverty, we have to make everybody poor. You know, that's the principle of totalitarianism. The idea that in order for you to make a society of equals, the government needs to take full control of the economy, and then everybody becomes subject, and then you get a North Korea. That is a problem, because then that's another extreme. And remember, freedom has to be part of the equation, and charity has to be part of the equation, which capitalism provides for that. And capitalism does provide for the ability for freedom, as long as the markets are regulated in order to provide some place to. So you need a referee because of a simple principle of original sin. People cheat, people lie, people try to go around it. The idea that you're just we're gonna have this like a champagne table, and you just pour the champagne on top, and it's gonna eventually trickle to everybody. It doesn't work because some people cheat. And the ideally you say, well, if you pour the champagne on top of the pyramid, and the wealthy have all this stuff coming through, eventually it's gonna trickle down, and it's gonna help the poor. Ideally, it should work like that. The people will gain wealth, and because they have wealth, they're going to be generous. But then there is greed. But greed is a moral problem. It's not a legal problem. Legally, we have to manage it. So you need courts. You have interventions. You have to tell people. You have to put people in jail. That's why you have white-collar crimes. Because people stop they don't pay just wages to their employees. They don't give benefits to the employees that they're supposed to give. And then they give themselves bonuses, which is the problem in 2008. Because of the idea that it's going to trickle down, well, you need to make sure that it's trickling down. And the worker gets what they need to do. But there will be another talk about work. Right now, just about.
So ideally, just one more comment. If we are in a capitalistic society, it would be great if some people are richer than others, but they give more to the poor.
Yes.
I mean, that freely.
Yes, and as a pastor, I can say for almost 20 years, those who give are not the rich. The ones who give are the generous.
Right.
Some of the generous are rich, and some of the generous are poor.
True.
But generosity is what gives.
Right.
And some people are very generous. Some people are very greedy. They may be poor, but greedy, and they don't give anything. You know, and the woman's mite, you know, when she goes and drops 2 coins in the temple, she gave all she had. But there are some people who only give their leftovers, and then it might be nothing, or they just don't want to give anything to anybody. So that's a moral problem. Human misery, number 2.
Human misery is a clear sign of man's natural condition of frailty and of his need for salvation. Christ the Savior showed a compassion in this regard, identifying himself with the least among men.
Keep going.
It is by what they have done for the poor that Jesus Christ will recognize his chosen ones. When the poor have the good news preached to them, it is a sign of Christ's presence.
And that's a beautiful thing. Read Matthew 25. When Jesus identifies himself with the poor and says, whenever you help the least of this, you're helping me. It's a sacramental reality that Jesus is giving us in the poor. Not a sacrament, but a sacramental reality that Jesus is giving us. So, Jesus is telling us, when you're helping the least of my brothers and sisters, you're helping me. And this is the test for our salvation. Think about this, because every time that we think of the poor, we need to think of Christ teaching on Matthew 25, when he says, when he separates the good and the bad, the sheep from the goats, he comes to the bottom line is whether you were charitable or not. I think, and that's the judgment. You want to know what you're going to need to go to heaven. If the same thing happened to the rich young man, he approaches Jesus and says, what is it that I need to do to go to heaven? And he says, well, follow the commandments. And he said, I've done all this my whole life. Well, now sell all your belongings and give the money to the poor. And he went away sad because he had too many belongings. He gave up becoming an apostle. He could have been one of the 12, actually the 13 then. If he would have just said yes. But he didn't, because he did not want to give up everything and give it to the poor. So it is at the end of the day, our judgment is going to be based on that, on helping those who are most in need. That's going to be our card, and that's going to be the final exam, as it were. Jesus says,
you will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. Matthew 26, Mark.
We can read it.
He makes this statement not to contrast the attention due to him with the service of the poor.
So in other words, he's saying the poor we're always going to be. So don't think I'm going to serve Jesus, but I'm not going to serve the poor. And that's a tension. It's a tension that I see in the church as well. From inside the church, whether you're going to serve Jesus or you're going to serve the poor. Jesus is basically giving this statement to say that in other words, he's told us he always going to be with us as well. Whenever 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, he's going to be there. But he is present in the poor. So I like to think of Mother Teresa all the time, because Saint Teresa of Calcutta, she would always say, you have to see Jesus in the poor. You cannot separate them. You cannot separate them. When she will go to the Eucharistic adoration in the morning, Mother Teresa will seek Jesus in the Eucharist so that she can continue seeing him through the day in the poor. What she called the poverty of the Eucharist. You had to make that connection always. When Jesus comes down in the real presence of the Eucharist, he doesn't come down as a rich piece of bread. He comes down as a poor, unleavened piece of bread. That reality of Jesus incarnate even in the Eucharist is something to be sorrowful for. That Jesus himself puts himself under us in the form of a flattened bread. That's the way he gives himself to us. He doesn't come across as a pan conchita or pan dulce from Mexico. He doesn't come as a little pumpkin pie that you look at it, it's like, oh, it could have been a nice cake. No, he comes to us in the poverty of a piece of bread. With all his imperfections, Jesus is incarnate in the Eucharist under such poverty. As a priest, one of the beautiful sights that I had as a priest, I don't have supernatural sights. But when you're looking at the host, for me, to look at Jesus on the Eucharist and seeing Jesus on the paten, broken, after I break him, and sitting in the paten, That's the most intimate moment with Christ that I have as a priest. Because he's broken in the Eucharist for me and for the people that's with me. He's there for me. In that brokenness is the same presence that Jesus gives himself in the poor. Jesus is there in a different way, but he says that he's there in the poor, in the sick, in the infirm, in the incarcerated. When you visit them, you visit me. He's telling us that that's where we're going to find him as well. Now, unfortunately, our minds, because they are so distracted, we tend to look for him in the Eucharist, or we run from the Eucharist and look for him in the poor. That's a tension. I see that tension in the church. Some people become social workers. You know, I'm not talking about priests or nuns, and leave the Eucharist aside. So he's like, okay, I'm not gonna be a sacristy rat. They say I'm not gonna be saying masses, and I'm just gonna be in helping and change the world and be out there. You know, like Pancho Villa kind of thing. Because he wasn't a priest. But that's a problem, because it's a temptation. You know, it's a temptation because as ministers of the church, we cannot just run away from our duties in the altar and go and fix the world. We have to, with our duties on the altar, change the world.
So balance.
There has to be a balance. Another alternative is the other side of the equation, is to say a priest or say a nun saying, well, I'm going to be doing priest, especially a parish priest, if we were to say, well, I'm going to be saying mass and my job is not to fix anything social because I'm not a social worker. Well, you are a social worker because there's people in front of you. The sheep are hurting. As a shepherd, you have to wind up their wounds. I visit the rich and visit the poor only within an hour sometimes. You know, when you go visit the sick, it doesn't matter when you're poor or rich. The priest is going to go to your house and he's going to be there. So you have to do both. Now, for us Christians, we have to do both. You know, it's not just the option for the Eucharist or the sacramentals of the church, but also the sacramental part of the ministry of the church, which means to take care of the poor. Yes.
Yeah. Years ago, I was listening to a talk by a priest who said that he had come back from one of the South American countries, and he said it was so sad where he was, because it was among the people. If you wanted to form a union to make your life better, you go to a Catholic priest. But if you wanted to learn about Jesus, you have to go to one of the other denominations. But the priests didn't teach about Jesus. They were out there
with guns and stuff.
For the unions.
Yeah, because that's if you look at the next paragraph, it is with that temptation. So this is straight from the compendium. Christian realism. Can someone read out loud because you're being recorded?
Christian realism, while appreciating on the one hand the praiseworthy effort being made to depict poverty, is cautious on the other hand regarding ideological positions and
messianistic beliefs.
Right, beliefs that sustain the illusion that it is possible to eliminate the problem of poverty completely from this world.
See, and that's where the temptation is. That's why we have to stick to the magisterium of the church. Don't veer off it. Stick with the magisterium. Don't go too far ahead and don't stay too far behind. Just walk with the magisterium, because the messianic belief, the caution that we have to have with that is the idea that we have to leave the sacred outside and be guided by ideological positions. Then what is their ideology? They said we have to be Christocentric. Christ is the ideal. You know, when we live in a world of left and right, we have to look at the perspective of the heart of Jesus. His left hand was nailed, and so was his right hand. Look at the heart of Christ and stay with the heart of Christ. Look at the heart of Christ and stay with the heart of Christ. Because otherwise we get delusional. And then we begin to think that we had to eradicate poverty. It becomes more important than Jesus himself. Eventually, it morphs into seeing that Jesus did not complete his job. And it morphs into the idea that Jesus did not complete his job. If Jesus would have died on the cross, he would have resurrected, he would have got rid of poverty. He doesn't have a formula to get rid of poverty, therefore he did not die on the cross and he did not resurrect. Pretty soon, that's what we're going to be preaching in the Secret Face. That's the ideology. When you take Jesus out of the equation, then you become the Messiah. Then I am better than Jesus. Marx is better than Jesus. Lenin is better than Jesus. Why? Because they have a formula to get rid of poverty. Planned Parenthood is a formula to get rid of poverty. Planned Parenthood thinks that in order to get rid of poverty, you have to stop them from being born. You have to think about that. It's like there is a problem with the ideology. So we don't follow ideologies, we follow Christ. The basic question, what would Jesus do, is as new today as it was in the 1990s. What is it that Jesus wants from us? And then he's never going to make us messiahs. The next paragraph, this will happen.
This will happen only upon Christ's return, when he will be with us once more, forever. In the meantime, the poor remain entrusted to us, and it is this responsibility upon which we shall be judged at the end of time. Matthew 25. Our Lord warns us that we shall be separated from him if we fail to meet the serious needs of the poor and the little ones who are his brethren.
And I like the way this document puts it. The poor remain entrusted to us. Think of a baby that's given to you when you become a parent. That baby is entrusted to you. It's given to you by God as a treasure. Now you gotta make sure that he or she grows healthy. But using the same language, the poor are entrusted to us. We gotta take care of them. You know, and I went to Uganda last month, 2 months ago now, and I was in a town hall meeting in a refugee camp called Bidi. And in the refugee camp we were, this is northern Uganda, that people from South Sudan are migrating to northern Uganda because of a civil war taking place in South Sudan. It's an ethnic war. Personally, I don't understand the politics of it, but people are dying. So they had to flee South Sudan and come to Uganda. So when they come to Uganda, Uganda is a poor country. It's trying to lift up. So it's not at bottom like other places. It's not like Kenya, but it's a little better. Let's put it that way. So it's working up. The last 20 years there's been lifting up a little bit. And then they welcome all these people. Bidi. I went to the pastor of Bidi on a little chapel, a church they have there, and the pastor was the only pastor of that region. There are other priests that help them, but he's the pastor. Being a pastor there is like being a bishop. I mean, he's got 800,000 people in his parish. You know, so it's like you are the pastor of 800 people. Most of them are non-Catholics. In northern Uganda, they're not Christians, they're Muslims or Arabs or something. But the ones who are coming are Christians. So he's got a parish for 800,000 people. And then you have 300,000 people coming over the border in Uganda. And then is it the poor receiving the poor? That's basically what you're seeing. And so we're in a town hall, in a church about a third of the size of this one. And it's made of sticks, and it has a roof made of tarp that says CRS and UNICEF. I don't know what that means, but it's tarp. I didn't know it was a church until we were sitting there in a while, and I said they had a pulpit. And I was like, oh, this is a church. It took me a while to figure it out. But we're sitting there, and the people were complaining because the latrines weren't filled and nobody was... Did you have people living in one place, 800,000 people, 1 million people there? I'm sorry, it's 500,000 people in the parish plus 300,000, so it's 800,000 people. People were complaining about the houses, the latrines, the termites. I mean, using termites. Here, you have termites, you call the guy and he comes over and injects your house. There are termite mounds about this big. And this is just a mound made of whatever, somebody's house. And this place is full of termites and you're trying to build houses. So they're complaining about all this stuff. We listened to all the complaints, then we got to another meeting to debrief afterwards, and then they tell us some of the staff or CRS are from Uganda. So I asked them the question, what is it that why do people welcome them? Why does the people in northern Uganda, who are so poor, welcome 300,000 refugees from South Sudan? Isn't it interesting? I was expecting some kind of nice answer, a hallmark answer. You know, like, oh, because Jesus says to love each other. But they're not Christians. So I was curious to see what they said. And they said, because today is them, tomorrow might be us. It's a very simple principle. It's true. The economy in Uganda is not stable. And the culture is not stable. Today, the South Sudanese have a civil war. Uganda in 10 years can be in a civil war. And where are they going to go? They're going to have to go up, or go side, or go now. I mean, you never know. So I think in a way, even though they're not Christian, they were following a Christian principle. Do unto others as you will have them do unto you, that Jesus said. We need to treat the poor as if we one day are going to be poor. We tend to think that the things we have are forever going to be there, and that somehow the wealth that we have today is going to be there tomorrow. I was speaking with somebody who distrusts banks and doesn't put money away. And the person tells me, says, why don't you put your money in the bank? Because I don't trust banks. I have it all in a little box. Somebody gets into your house, and all your savings for your whole life can be gone in 30 seconds. All your savings. Well, if opening the bank can crash, but at least you get $25,000 back. But all your savings can be gone, or $250,000, I think, can be gone if you have a little box. Now, we don't think that would happen, but I've seen stories that happens. Somebody gets sick, all your savings are gone, and then you're poor. Someone goes to the casino and gambles their whole monthly allowance, and they're poor. Some people are very easy can become poor. But then when we have wealth, we treat the poor like we're never going to be in their situation. We have to put ourselves in the situation. That's what Lent is about. Try to be poor during Lent by choice, to get used to it. In case the Lord were to call us. Today I met with a couple, and they said, Father, they're going to help our church building, which someday you'll hear about it, but I cannot talk about it much until about 3 weeks. But they said, Father, I want you to know that we're going to sacrifice a few things at home so that we can build a new church. For me, it was a moving experience. But sometimes people stop doing certain things because they say, I'm attached to many things. I don't need that much stuff. I can help the poor. I can help the church. I can help other institutions in order to help the poor if I get rid of myself of these attachments. If I only do that. But we don't do that because we get so caught up with all the stuff that we get carried around. Anyway, now you know my passion. The church's love.
The church's love for the poor is inspired by the gospel of the Beatitudes, by the poverty of Jesus, and by his attention to the poor.
That's where the inspiration for the gospel comes. Jesus himself lived in poverty. He who was God, says in Philippians, emptied himself of his dignity as God and became one like us in all things but sin. Never forget, Philippians 10, it is our creed. Jesus did not come and just preaching around and pointing at people, do this and you do that. No, he became one like us in all things. He emptied himself and became one like us. And that's the can we empty ourselves? That would be the can we turn ourselves over? Inside out. That's a challenge. This love
concerns material poverty, and also the numerous forms of cultural and religious poverty.
Okay, so there, the cultural and Pope Francis in his when he dedicated the year to a year of mercy, he talked about the miseries of the poor. And he spoke about the material poverty, the cultural misery, religious misery, and moral misery of our culture. Religious misery, as much as people are not as religious as they used to be, deprived of God completely. Moral misery is that people live like God doesn't exist, in falling in all kinds of vices, and people just lives in a cycle of vices, giving themselves to sin like nothing happens. That's a misery. I see addicts, and when I see an addict, I do not see joy. When I see an addict, I see slavery. I see somebody who's unhappy. I see someone who's in misery. So sometimes I read some people going to the addictions because the illusion that this is going to solve my problems, but this misery. So it's connecting with the misery of the human reality. That Jesus became one of us, and he entered into our misery without having committed any flaws himself. The church,
since her origin and in spite of the failing of many of her members, has not ceased to work for their relief, defense, and liberation through numerous works of charity, which remain indispensable always and everywhere.
and that's what that's why I got involved with CRS. Somebody asked me recently, Father, you're a pastor of a church. What are you doing up there? I don't know. People are nosy. You know, I mean, for me, I am obedient to the church, and for me, the obedience comes to the bishop. I had to be obedient to my faithful, in a sense that I had to listen to the faithful to see what they're cooing about. You know, that's a new word I just learned recently. Cooing. You know, you're laughing. You know what that cooing means? That's the noise that dogs make. You know, when the dogs are together, they make these noises. You know, like that is cooing. So as a pastor, I have to listen to the flock to see what they're cooing about. You know, what's going on? I hear a buzz and I say, oh, what's going on? What's going on in people's homes? You know, I need to see their wounds. You know, I need to talk to the shepherd. But then the church calls me also and says, Father, we want you to do this. And do you think you'll be good to a good talker? You like to talk and listen to yourself, so we're going to sing somewhere you can listen to something. But I think I see the church in Uganda as much as the church here. I don't see a difference. A priest is a priest. But talking on behalf of the bishops and their outreach to the poor, I'm not afraid of going to a congressperson or a senator and sitting there and tell them, you know, you gotta have a preferential option for the poor. Because we're a Christian nation. I'm founded on Christian principles. Doesn't sound very politically correct, so it depends which side of the aisle you're talking to. But we believe in Jesus. We believe that Jesus gave himself and that we're better than that. So you have to challenge the thing. I see it as a call to be a priest to help these organizations. I don't trust I'll help people directly. I don't trust it. The Mexican bishops gave a decree a few years ago and said, when you cross the border, do not give money to people on the streets. Sounds really bad, doesn't it? And it says don't buy chiclets either. So the Mexican bishops had to put up a statement to tell people not to buy chiclets.
Why?
And don't pay when they clean the windshield, those little children. Because they're being trafficked. They're being used. There are people who lord over them in the corners watching them. These kids, their parents are not in town. They come from other places of Mexico and they bring them in. They sell them. Take my kid because he gives you more money. There are women with children walking in the Nogales right now whose babies, there's not theirs. They rented the baby for a day. I'm not lying. I'm not making things up. They go to a neighborhood up in the mountains in Nogales, the little hills, and they go to a mom who just gave birth to a baby, and they say, okay, I'll give you 100 pesos for the day if I can carry your baby, and I was okay. And then brings the baby back at night. Because when you have a baby in your back, people will give you more. And you're not going to start asking in the window, is that your baby? Can you show me an ID? You don't know. In Nogales, they cut in Nogales, in Hermosillo, they stopped the sex traffic ring with children. And this is happening in the border. So why? Because they just use them. You see them running against each other because it's whoever makes more gets special prizes, whoever makes less gets punished. It's a whole market of people. So, but our conscience tells us, oh, just give them 20 pesos. You got a bunch of them that they left you from the toll. It calms the conscience. So what did the bishop say? Help orphanages. Help the social service. Help the institutes that take care of those kids when they're actually recovered, when they're trying to find their parents. You have to help the social services that are going to actually put their parents with the children together. A fact that I learned in Uganda. I have 10 minutes so I can continue lying here. You know that in the world, only 80% of the orphans in the world are orphans?
80% are?
No, are not. 80% of the orphans in the world, in the developing world, are not orphans. And when people see things in the television, oh, you're going to help the orphans in Kenya or Uganda, it's because they're going to send money to an orphanage. But it doesn't mean that the children there are orphans. 80% of those kids in developing nations have parents, and the orphanage takes the children to take care of them instead of the parents.
Why? Because the parents are unable, because they're working, or what?
No, sometimes they just convince them. It would be better for your child if it doesn't grow up with you. Send them to us because people are sending money to us. And people just write a check. $20 a month. $19.95 a month and you get a child. And he's going to write you letters.
Oh, yeah.
You know, well, you take the kid from somewhere. If only 20% of those are orphans, and they usually have extended family. But he says what you do is in order to you turn this into a business. And these businesses are not run by religious corporations. They're run by people who just made up a business. And their business is to run an orphanage and to raise money for it, and they get a cut. So you don't think about those things, but there is a campaign in Uganda right now for the reunification of families. So the Catholic Church is leading right now in Uganda in order to help reunite families with their children who are orphans. That's why these institutions exist, because the object of the church is not to help the orphans, but to reunite families and to keep families together, because we believe in our doctrine that the family is the nucleus of our society. So we have to look case by case until we find their parents. Sometimes we find the parents, sometimes the parents, and in some of the cases, the child speaks a different language now. I met this kid, his name is Andrew. He speaks English. His father does not. He speaks the mother tongue. And they just reunited about 3 months ago. Well, 6 months by now. But they're getting to know each other again. Because when basically he sent him to an orphanage because they will take care of my son. The mom died. And then I can work. And they will make sure that my son grows up healthy. But nobody can grow up healthy in an institution. Nobody. There are many horror movies made of that. You know, nobody grows healthy in an institution. There's nothing healthier than your own family. So those are the kinds of things that we're battling against. But it's all this done in the name of poverty.
I have a question about, I have someone that's approached me with, that Catholic Relief Services supports, if you give your money to them, they use it to give out condoms and birth control and things like that. So how do I defend that?
It's a lie. I mean, it's a fake news, you call it. But you just basically tell them, go to the website and Google that. You go to CRS.org and Google it. It will give you the bishop's statements on it. And that basically it's a conspiracy theory. It's not real. It's just not real. They will have to triangulate a lot of things. It's like trying to explain UFOs. I've seen the videos and I've seen what they call evidence. And basically you have to take all these lines and it's like a conspiracy theory. You know, like saying that the Pentagon planned 9/11 kind of thing. But it's not. Because we have an ethical responsibility as Catholics. And every company that works at CRS and the monies are funded through, especially to the Rice Wall, for example, they have to be vetted. Even the social workers are vetted and trained. And so there's checks and balances that bishops ensure that the doctrine is carried through. Every dime is followed through to make sure. But they claim to be, I went to one of the websites, for example, the Lepanto Institute, they were saying that it was they were going through people's employees of CRS Facebook pages and their personal Facebook page and trying to draw conclusions because of whatever statement they were putting out. But you cannot draw conclusions. If I went to anybody's pages, I don't know what I'm going to find in them. But these are employees. Some of them are employees that had nothing to do with doctrine or allocation of funds. Some of them are drivers. Some of them are Muslim drivers. Actually, a great majority of Catholic staff overseas is not Catholic. You know, what they do in their private life, as long as they drive well, we don't have a say. But some of these people, what they conjure is because of those statements that they hear that. Another one is because they see that CRS is working side by side other organizations that do promote contraceptives.
I think that's what.
So, but I know, then the problem of direct or indirect collaboration is the moral question. Whether CRS is directly or indirectly given to these situations, then it's not. What happens is you just happen to see, because if you go to one of those locations like Bidi Bidi, I would suggest, you have 100 organizations helping in that refugee camp. And each organization is in charge of something different. For us, it's AIDS prevention through abstinence, education, training, latrines. We teach people how to wash their hands, how to bathe, how to use soap. And we also do housing. We built 1,500 houses. So that's how we do it. If another non-profit comes and they begin to teach something else, or they are in charge of vaccines or something else, then that's the organization doing. But those are not our funds. That's not our money and our resources.
So they don't just dump the money into one thing and then.
No, it doesn't go like that. No, every grant, and that's the point. Every grant that goes to it is earmarked. Every grant. The money that you give to CRS, if you go to the side of the box, this month is featuring 4 countries. One of them is Uganda. And 1 country every week. At the end of the day, there's going to be divided, the rice bowl, among those 4 countries that are featured. And it goes into directly tracked grants. So what happens is that, let's say I have a CRS office here in Sahuarita. And then I get a check for $20,000 for teaching people how to wash their hands. Then you gotta go and train 10,000 people with that, or 50,000 people, whatever. When I turn in receipts, it has to be for things that are allocated for that training. I cannot go to the pharmacy and buy all the things and teach them something else.
Well, I kinda thought so, but I didn't know.
Yeah.
What to say.
Anyways,
Okay,
sorry.
so,
You can be losing us attacking about something else. Now you know why I had to travel.
It makes it so difficult because you know how many envelopes we get every day from this and that. I mean,
No, I don't know because I don't see it.
well, I don't believe me. So then you have to choose. I mean, you know, I get envelopes from everybody. And how do we choose? Do we have to check because?
You talk to your pastor, you tell your pastor, will tell you.
I know the pastor is going, I already go there, but you know, there's so many. What do we do? Just
I know, and some of them are like food for the poor is good, but at the end of the day, I think of CRS because CRS is integral.
Well,
You know, and no integral human development. So it's not just food. Whatever there is food, there is clothing, there is latrines, there is health, there is other stuff. It's not just food. So I just.
One of the things that kills me is the soldiers. You know what the soldiers do and stuff like that, they die and all that. But, I mean, so many organizations have to choose who do you give. I mean, you have all these thoughts and all these feelings about these people.
Yeah.
You just choose a parish.
Well, you can, no, you can, I mean, there are different ways of doing it, but I think it's according to what people means. Is that I remember one bishop saying 514, which basically means it's 5% to your parish. If you're gonna give 10%, 5% to your parish, 1% to the diocese, and 4% to other charities. So I hear that being used. The Catholic Church doesn't have a tithe system, but it just says you gotta help the poor. But its helping organization is healthier than trying to just give $5 to somebody outside Taco Bell. If you're gonna have, like in some situations, because you're working in clerics like me, and you're walking into Subway, and there's somebody outside saying, "Father, would you give me something for a sandwich?" And I said, "Why don't we just sit down and have a sandwich together? And tell me about it." I think that's better than just give you a gift card and walking away.
Right.
Because then you gotta make sure it's in a public place. You don't wanna be, but because I think that's more gospel-like. Then we sit down and you can tell me all your pains while I'm having a sandwich. And then we see what goes on. Sometimes they don't want to.
Yeah.
And it's sad because then they're missing lunch. But I can give them a gift card and buy them a sandwich for them. But I usually try to see, or if you go downtown and you see somebody homeless, you want to adopt this, well, buy a cup of coffee and sit down and see what's going on. Safe. Don't go at 11 at night. So it's gotta be safe. So, did you get the 514?
Yeah.
I should tell people like that, but I tell people that what if I give you 1%? Well, that's up to you.
Father,
Yeah.
before we go there, I forgot to ask you something. Going back to the orphanage.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, this couple is gonna leave a son in an orphanage. Do they get money for that, or they do it just for the well-being of the son?
Most of the time it's the well-being of the son.
Okay.
Sometimes because one of the parents is missing, some fathers die. I think fathers die more than mothers, but that's another topic. But the fathers die in war, they had to go away, or whatever happened. And sometimes you have women, single mothers, and they don't know how to do it, and they just basically, there are people who are betting and looking for kids. The more kids you have, the more you can ask. Unfortunately, it's like a reverse to our school system. The more children you have in your school, the government gives you more money. Well, the more children you have in an orphanage, the more money you can ask for, and you can try to justify it to the local government. But now the local government is cracking on fake orphanages in Uganda. And they're basically looking into, actually these are for orphanages, it's just a house filled with kids. So that's a humanitarian problem. Now, at CRS, we have to leave the kid there, and sometimes work with these orphanages, even as fake as they may be, because we need to look for the good of the child. It might mean that the good of the child is going to be there left a little bit until we find cousins, family, uncles, and you'll be amazed. In Uganda, the families are very knit together. They grow in the same regions. People don't travel far. They're like Jesus in that way. So they don't go very far. But the orphanage may take him to the other side of the country. May take the kid. And then you need to find the family. And sometimes you have to do it through DNA to make sure that you have the kid with the right family. It takes time. And we don't want to put him in another orphanage, but we're looking for their parents. So social workers have to work one-on-one with each kid, become familiar with them, and then follow up after the reunification to make sure that things are okay. So it takes about a year and a half of adaptation again back in home.
Father, do you, how do you say, like the people who are running the orphanages, do you get a lot of resistance or problems from them?
From where?
For trying, the people who are running the orphanages, do you get, problems from them?
Oh no, I don't, not personally me, but I mean the church. No, CRS, they work with orphanages, but they work with the local government, the Ugandan government that wants to clean the orphanages, the fake orphanages especially. There's a need for orphanages. Don't take me wrong,
Right.
but the need is not for all. 80% of them are not, shouldn't be there. So basically, it turns into almost a fraud. I mean, you're just basically taking kids out of their homes so you can run a charity. You know, that it's easy to take care of a kid, but you gotta take care of their parents too. Give them jobs, health benefits and stuff. I mean, it's not just take the kid. Well, how much can they eat? Can the kid eat? You know, you're gonna make sure that they grow in a family. As imperfect as families are, is better than strangers in an institution. You don't want a 10-year-old institutionalized. You know, it's not healthy. So it's better a family with its imperfections than that. Now it's more expensive. But in these cases, for example, to this man, Andrew's father, I don't remember his name. He was Catholic. We needed to train him on how to be a mechanic. You know, we had to train him. We had to take him to rehab because he was alcoholic, and we had to help him get rid of the alcoholism as well. See what happens when you lose a child. I mean, it hurts you. Right? I mean, people are people. If you had to give up your child because of poverty, and then the man becomes an alcoholic, I wouldn't blame it. You know, there's no human element to that. There are consequences, and now you got to restore the family to health, and then accompany them. You have to be with them. So it's a lot of work. It's not like 100,000 people and we're just going to put trucks and then we're going to take care of them. That's what the mafia did in New Jersey. They would just come in with cheese and bread and give it away so people would like it. But I think it's more work to sit down with the poor, to have a meal with them. That's what I think during Lent, with the little rice bowls, we are sitting with them technically, you know, praying for them and being with the poor. Eat like a poor. The recipes that they give you on the rice bowl are from the impoverished nations, you know. They don't have meat every day. But they know 100 ways to cook plantains. Actually, they're not that bad. They're very good when they fry them. Okay, let's move along because I've already passed 10 minutes. So let's just go to close. We're just going to read the gospel injunction. Prompt by the gospel injunction.
Oh, prompted by the gospel injunction, you have received without paying, give without pay. Matthew 10. The church teaches that one should assist one's fellow man in his various needs and fills the human community with countless works of corporal and spiritual mercy.
We could keep reading.
Keep it. Among all these, giving alms to the poor is one of the chief witnesses to fraternal charity. It is also a work of justice pleasing to God, even if the practice of charity is not limited to almsgiving, but implies addressing the social and political dimensions of the problem of poverty. In her teaching, the church constantly returns to this relationship between charity and justice. When we attend to the needs of those in want, we give them what is theirs, not ours. More than performing works of mercy, we are paying a debt of justice. The Council Fathers strongly recommended that this duty be filled correctly, remembering that what is already due in justice is not to be offered as a gift of charity. Love for the poor is certainly incompatible with immoderate love of riches or their selfish use.
So in the call to justice, it's been the Second Vatican Council. When we attend to the needs of those in want, we give them what is theirs, not ours. If there are certain elements of the human person that need certain things. Food, education, clothing, religious liberty is one of them as well. Life, in the pursuit of happiness. Basically, people have certain indelible rights. We have to make sure that people have those rights. It's not meant to be what they want, but it's what their rights are. So we have to respect those rights. And if it's already due to them injustice, we cannot call it charity. So that's an important thing. If food is already due to people because they're people, they deserve to eat healthy. We cannot say that giving food to the poor is an act of charity. It's basically an act of justice. We're just giving them what is theirs already. When I was growing up, there were two things that I'm going to leave you with in regards to solidarity, because we're going to tackle solidarity later. But one of them is my father's rule. My father's rule is that regardless of his soul, is that nothing in the house that was meant to be food could be claimed by anyone individual. Nothing. If it was food, it was for all. That means you couldn't say, this ham is mine, I call dibs on the milk. I'm gonna have, what was there was for all. You couldn't call it, not even guess. If a guest wanted something, they can have it. You couldn't say, I call dibs on that last apple. If it's there, it was for all. That was the rule in my house. So, you can imagine we had 6 kids, so there was a lot of food. But we went through it really quick. We had to preach it. But we always had people over at the house, and food was never a question. Another rule, the second rule, and the last I'm going to leave you with, was my grandma's rule. Do not eat unless everyone is served. Which balances the first one. You know, do not start eating until everyone has been served. You know, that's the work of solidarity. You know, it's not just to say everything is ours. Everybody's ours. But I think at the end is to say, we got to make sure that everybody has something. So if there's only one apple left, cut it into pieces and share it with somebody else. And wait till everybody has a piece before eating. Nowadays, sometimes I go to homes and I see kids running in, grabbing their food and going upstairs. It's sad, not only because the priest is visiting, but second is because there are guests in the house, there's something going on, and the kid comes and grabs his food and just goes upstairs. I think we should sit at the table and they all should just wait until everybody's served. Not because there is not enough food, but to teach them to wait until everybody's served. It's an act of charity. It's an exercise of temperance as well, because then you have to wait and hold on until everybody has something to eat that you can eat. It kind of creates good manners as well. So with that, we're going to pray to the Virgin Mary, and we're going to close this evening. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and the hour of our death. Amen. The Lord be with you. And 1 second. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace. Thanks be to God.